I feel like the things that are tried and true, the classics, like they just kind of hang around and they last. And I think if we talk about what agility truly is, it doesn't need to be reinvented. There's nothing wrong with the original base of what it is. I think the problem we've had is that people have reinvented it over the years for whatever purposes, monetization or whatever.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the Agile for Agilists Podcast, the series made by Agile enthusiasts for Agile enthusiasts. And now for your hosts, Drew Podwal and Brad Nelson.
Hey Agilists, Brad here. Longtime listeners may remember today's guest, Todd Hallowell, from Season 2, when he joined us with Ron Cortell to talk about Fast Agile. Well, today, Todd is joining Drew and me to reflect on the current state of Agile. We dive into what it really means to be Agile, and we unpack the broader implications of organizations choosing a rigid linear approach to delivery versus one that prioritizes value through adaptability. This conversation felt like a bit of a return to our regularly scheduled programming, getting back to the heart of Agile itself. All right, enough intro. Let's roll the track.
When you brought this up and you talked about wanting to get together and talk about this, it got me going back to an old presentation I never really did anything with that I actually submitted to PMI this year for their PMI Global Summits. The idea that it's just kind of delivery clickbait, that Agile isn't Agile, waterfall can be, and other inflammatory ideas. So I think it's all interesting. Drew, it's interesting to me that you talked about the funding model of projects and products being a differentiator between like traditional project management and agility. And I guess I don't really think about the funding model as much as because I think that you'll often see products that have projects that exist. Projects spin up and down, whereas products kind of last throughout. The analogy I would use for that is like my daughter, forgive me if she ever hears this, Quinn, is a product, right? There will always be things to do, but her teenage years are one project. Her adolescent years are one project. When she gets married and I'm mentoring her is another project. So projects existing within the product. And that the product itself funds those projects. For me, the agility piece has always been about the perception of risk, and we can define risk however we want, right? It's the level of complexity, it's the unknowns, it's all that. And looking at your presence or what you perceive to be the risk present and your appetite for risk and trying to balance those two things out. And then agility is how often you inspect and adapt as a way to mitigate or reduce that risk so that your appetite for risk and your presence of risk are more closely aligned. Which is why I've got this idea that I think that when the whole thing happened and everybody was in uproar about it, for me, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I don't know that the people who merged did it for the reasons that I think that there are benefits, but I've always argued that waterfall can be agile. Because if we define agility as just inspecting and adapting at the frequency that makes sense to reduce risk, I mean, if we've been in a project before that was waterfall, you do that. You just do it at the end, right? We do a lessons learned so we don't do this again in our next project. The problem is that most often with the work we're doing today, inspecting at the end isn't enough. So waterfall gets a bad rap. What we need to do is get better about determining how often we need to inspect and adapt. So that, and that's going to be dependent on the risk we perceive, right? If we think there's a lot of risk and we want to reduce that risk, then we're going to inspect and adapt more often. The analogy that we were talking about recently was the idea of getting into a university lecture hall. Do you want to find out you're in the wrong classroom when you sit down at the chair or at the doorway? Mm-hmm. And the work that we're doing today is so complex that the more frequently you can inspect and adapt, the less likely you are to incur large amounts of risk. Now, not all work is that complex. So maybe there's some work that it makes sense where we don't inspect as often because, I don't know, Brad, you tell me. I've been on projects where we inspected and adapted and it was like, yeah, we don't need to meet every 2 weeks. This is a waste of time. Like it's really simple, it's predictable, but somebody wanted us to check a box somewhere, so we're doing 2-week sprints or we're doing Kanban or we're doing regular inspections. But it's like, what's different? Nothing changed. Okay, we'll meet again in 2 weeks to talk about the same thing. So there can be overkill as well.
But what happens to the people when the project is over?
That feels like a loaded question, Drew.
Well, I mean, like it's very rare to see a company that leverages project management methodologies that isn't like offshoring or using a vendor when there's a new project work and they're instead of using flow-based metrics to decide how much they can do within a period of time based on quality and innovation and relentless improvement, like that they just bolt on another project team and another project team and another project team. And I think that that's inherently part of that type of thinking is part of the waterfall model, whereas the product model, like you said, your daughter, you were going to be investing in your daughter for the rest of her life. And you need to fund that, right? And ideally, a good product manager knows how to keep their product relevant so that it's always the problem solver for the job to be done of the customer, even as that evolves. And in a project world, the work starts and stops and starts and stops, and people come and go. There's no institutional knowledge really built up. And it's hard to justify like some sort of project code for people to bill their hours to for an inspect and adapt event. Like, why do we want to pay for people to come together and talk about how to do things, differently, better, right? Like, we don't have time for that right now. We just need to get the work done.
I think we're giving frameworks too much credit and too much blame. I think the problem with that is that most people will say that they expect frameworks to solve their problems, right? This is why we're seeing the Agile is dead movement. Well, agility didn't fix my problems. Well, it never was going to, right? No more than a light switch cleans up my room when I turn it on is agility going to fix my problem. So if my room is cluttered and I turn on a light, is the room magically cleared up? No. It's just shown me what it is that I need to do with it. We've given frameworks too much problem. In no more of a way did that light switch put that stuff there. I think the stuff you're talking about are organizational dysfunctions. And they would exist whether the framework was there or it wasn't, whether you called it a project or a product. Those are organizational dysfunctions that exist because of what people are driving towards.
But I think, though, that there are things within the various Agile frameworks, the Lean Agile mindset, business agility, that embrace the concept of, executives having a role in all of this and investing in people as opposed to projects. Waterfall doesn't promote those kinds of cultural shifts that need to happen. The Lean Agile mindset does. And I think that the waterfall mindset and the Lean Agile mindset are at odds with each other.
Where my thought was first going when you started talking, Todd, is really around like the double-edged sword of labels. Being able to label something from a psychological standpoint can help you to address it, trauma, that sort of stuff. But at the same time, I feel like it also kind of corners you, and it can make things, complicated, I guess, because you're thinking in one way. I think one of the problems that we run into right now is this label of like, this is waterfall, this is agile. To your point as well, Todd, like these dysfunctions can exist in both worlds. And I think part of the challenge, as I've been reflecting on this, is what is agile? I think everybody has a slightly different explanation for it because there's no agile body that says this is agile. And agile came after the work. People were working in a Scrum way or an XP or RUP or whatever the popular approach was at the time. And they're like, what are all the things that we need to do to be agile? And they focused on culture, to your point, Drew. Like culture, I think, was the most important part to them. And that's why we have values and principles, not practices. And the practices should be a demonstration of the principles, but they're not always taught together. And to me, there's disconnects there. Like, to me, Agile is really just another flavor of the scientific method. Right? We're inspecting and adapting. We have a hypothesis. We do as much as we can to confirm that hypothesis. But that's not necessarily in the manifesto.
So this, to me, I think, in my opinion, is where it's gotten away from us. And at some point, it changed. And it became the Agile Manifesto, right? Which made Agile, and I'm going to go really parochial here. It made Agile a noun. Mm-hmm. Agile's not. Agile's an adjective. It's a descriptor of how we do things and how we work. It was never written as the Agile Manifesto. And words are important, Brad. We've had this conversation. Labels matter, right? They convey meaning and definition. They set expectations. It is the manifesto for Agile software development, meaning this is how we believe we can deliver and build with agility built in. Like when we do it that way and we use it the correct way and we look at the values and we look at the principles, they're all driving towards this way of working, which is a way of working that is agile, responsive to change, responsive to feedback in our environment. And if you think about it, I'm sure there are extremes. So I'm not going to say there aren't, because the moment I do, somebody's going to say, well, there's this extreme. But a majority of things exist on the continuum of agility. And I don't mean, let's take software agility out of it. Let's think about true agility, right? This idea to observe, take in feedback, and respond to that. Things exist somewhere on that continuum, either having more or less. Is a center or a safety on an offensive line agile? Well, it depends. Relative to a cornerback, much less. But there is some agility. They still have to take in feedback, right? If they're not taking in feedback and they're not responding and they don't possess agility, their quarterback's going to get sacked every time if they do the same thing every single time. So this idea of agility as an adjective being zero sum, I think is how somehow where that came into mind. You were agile or you weren't, is what set us down this path. You know, you look at the principles, you look at the everything, and all those things point back to building agility into how we work. Not being agile as a thing, but building agility into something we already do. You said this, right? We were already doing the work. What we wanted to focus on was how we do the work. How do we increase our agility? Because they recognized then that risk was growing, complexity was growing, challenges were growing. The way we've always done things, the predictability we had is not the same anymore. We've got to figure out, how do we put practices and stuff in place? How do we put principles in place that are going to keep us focused on being responsive to change?
Yeah, I also think it was a reaction to the growing waterfall movement, because before, I mean, people had done waterfall off and on throughout history, but before Winston Royce's paper in the late 70s was bastardized and companies started pushing that narrative in the 80s, which is an interesting time because that's also when we saw the campaign against loyalty as well out of corporations. It kind of feels like it goes hand in hand to me. I don't know if they needed to define it because it was just the way we worked.
So here's an example, though. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. In Waterfall, there's a role for that. It's called a BA. All right. BA is supposed to go off and get the requirements and document the requirements. And it's supposed to be in this like tip-top ready shape. Like there's an assumption that we hired this person to go gather requirements. They had the conversations. They've documented it. This now should be ready for the team to do their work. There are roles baked into Waterfall, like the service model, right, that would not allow for agility to be developed within that organization.
But I disagree, Drew, because I still think there's agility there. What they're saying in the waterfall model is the work's well known, it's simple enough that the BA can go do this, and it's not complex, they can bring it back, and it's well understood enough that they can translate that. Because there's still an inspection point. But hang on, but there's still I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying that that's how it was built, right? There's still an inspection point because they're still going through phases. You have a requirements gathering, you have a development phase, you have a testing phase, and then you're getting it out there and you're putting it in front of people. You have this user acceptance phase. What they're saying is, or what they believed at the time was, hey, we know enough about this that we don't need to get the business back involved until we get it out there and it's testable. And we get them testing it and they're checking it. But they're still at inspection phase. It's just they believe, right or wrong, that's not the question here, that it was simple enough that that one person could go do that work, that that person had the skills.
I just think there's no world where that's like, I also think that having a single product owner is an intentional whip limit on the team's backlog, right? When you have multiple BAs supporting a product owner on a Scrum team, what you're doing is you're preparing too much work in the backlog. And, 9 times out of 10, none of it's actually really prepared, right? It still needs to be refined by the team, but because you have this role of BA, often, we don't need the team to refine it. The team just needs to be told what to do. I don't want to speak in big sweeping terms, but it's been very rare that when I get into discussions about leadership versus management principles with somebody, who's tried and true waterfall based, it just feels like they're just not able to comprehend the idea of, not managing people, of leading people. How will I know that they're doing what I need them to do if I'm not managing them? And I don't know. I hear where you're coming from, right? That like there could very well be a world where waterfall could be agile-ish, right? Or agile, could follow the principles and the values. My biggest fear, though, is that there's too many people out there who really don't understand what the HE double hockey sticks they're talking about when it comes to agile, waterfall, scrum, any of these methodologies. And it's dangerous because it's like I see dead people. They don't even know they're dead, right? Like,
Oh yeah, Sixth Sense.
Sixth Sense. Yeah. That's what I think of every time there's people out there who just don't know what they're talking about, but they think they know what they're talking about. And I think it's very dangerous to support that. And so, I know I'm speaking a lot, but to your point, Brad, like of it being a reaction to something, I know that what I'm proposing right now is a reaction, an overreaction to the problems that I'm seeing within the adoption and embracement of agility in the present day. Because, to me, it's that waterfall spectrum that infringes upon true agility to actually grow.
Yeah, to
It was a whole
me,
lot I said, but yeah.
yeah, I hear you. I don't think the practices are inherently the problem, whether they're found in the PMBOK, whether they're found in a Scrum guide. Like you can waterfall Scrum. You can follow everything that Scrum says and still be waterfall. It's more complicated than that. And I think that's why people struggle. I know mindset is also kind of a loaded word. Is it a mindset? Is it not? But it's really your approach to it mentally. When we tend to talk about waterfall, we're really talking about people who are trying to control. They have a controlling mindset.
Yes.
And I'm glad you said that, Brad, because I think there's a lot of people who think project management equals project control, and they're not the same, right? There is an idea of some things that we can control, and I think that there's a strong desire to control things, and they want to implement management. Something you said too, Drew, that got me thinking. I think what we're seeing is so many people focused on the outputs. They're following these practices, trying to accomplish these certain things to say they did these things. And ultimately, if the tool doesn't work, throw it out. Like, we've got to get to a culture where we are outcome focused, where we are value focused, where we're purpose focused. He's one of my favorite people. He's my celebrity crush. So if he listens, I want lunch, Simon. He calls it start with why, but for me, it's all about start with purpose, right? If you don't understand the purpose of what it is you're doing, you will never understand whether your practice is healthy or destructive. You have to understand what your purpose is you're trying to achieve in order to be able to measure what it is you're doing for any level of success or effectiveness or health.
Yeah. To the control thing, my perspective is that, sorry, I know my chair just squeaked. I have the noisy chair. The less noisy chair is back in storage, but, it's a fallacy of control, right? And the risk that you take is it's documented as being in control on paper. And how risky is it for me to submit this status report that paints everything as rosy is really what it boils down to. And I don't know, I just think that it's the culture, right? But if you aren't funding your work as a value stream, right, and you aren't looking at things as a long-lasting product, you're never going to get the benefits that the manifesto is only the tip of the iceberg in describing. That's where it breaks down for me it is all about the culture. And I do think that the manifesto is a mindset. And I know people hate that, but to me, it's just a mindset. There's no practice in there. There's no instructions, do this, then do that. These are the values and the principles that should be baseline to all of the work that you're trying to achieve. So I think to me, it really does have to be funded in a different way in order to be able to shift the corporate culture in a way that opens up the stress and the pressure so that there's room for agility to grow within all the nooks and crannies.
I think the other thing too is we're looking at like product and agility and waterfall. Those have been the three big terms, right, that we've tossed around. One thing that it's interesting to me that I'm thinking about, I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Agility and waterfall are ways of working. Product is not a way of working. It's a different thing entirely. It's how we're classifying what it is that we're working on, right? So we can talk about, I think that You can have product and your approach may be waterfall. Your approach may be agility. I think you can still do projects within product, but I think to think about product in the same terms as we're thinking about agility and waterfall, now we're looking at apples, oranges, and wheat. Like we've completely brought something else into the picture because we're talking about ways of working versus what we're working on or how we're classifying our work. So product is a noun, agility and waterfall are verbs, or how we're working, or they're adverbs. It's describing how we work or how we're doing what we're doing. So I want to make sure we don't get too deep down that rabbit hole because I don't want to look at product and go, oh, well, you can't have product and waterfall in projects. I think you can. Is it commonly done? No, but I think you can. They're just different structures.
I would say the other way around, actually. You could theoretically like slot your projects as if they were features in a backlog, knowing that we're going to leverage capacity-based planning to inform us what we can do and how much we can do. But to me, Agile processes promote a sustainable development and maintaining a constant pace indefinitely. The culture behind project-based funding is all about like doing more with less. Whereas within the lean agile mindset, we recognize that if we only have like 60 miles of gas in the tank, then we can only go 60 miles. How we choose to use that gas is up to us, right? We can do one big long trip, or we can do some small mini trips as MVPs. And I just don't think that the PMBOK really supports that way of thinking at all.
I like where you're going with that, Todd. I mean, because a product is a product. Like a product is a thing that exists. If your website is your product, whether you did that in projects with 20 different teams that are no longer here, or you have one dedicated Agile team, it's still a product. Now, there might be things that you notice, like quality or actual value realization. The thing that I find fascinating, I constantly reflect on, is that when we look at what would be considered the best practice right now for product management, it's product thinking. And product thinking is essentially Agile.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I don't think product is really a noun. Like if you think about Marty Kagan, right? Like what he talks about is definitely way more than just a noun. There are practices and principles, and maybe it's not thread it together and sell it as a methodology, right? But there's definitely a way of working that Marty's promoting, so I don't specifically, I think a product is a noun, right? But leveraging product development practices and principles is not a noun.
Fair. Yeah, and I think I was thinking more of the a product. Like a product is a thing, and a product may be broken up in its development or its life into multiple projects, whether they're done by one team or a variety of teams. But I don't think that you can say that, hey, product and project are separate. Now, product thinking may be different than project thinking. But a product is typically going to be built over the course of multiple smaller projects. And that's where the funding stuff comes in.
See, that's where I disagree. Is I don't think that a product is necessarily needs to be funded as a series of projects, right? Like I think that value stream management and funding various value streams that the product is supporting, like what you're doing is you're saying, I'm willing to invest this much money in this value stream for this year, for the next 2 years, for the next 5 years, as a experiment to see how it goes. That you're then developing long-lasting teams that are developing the institutional knowledge required to work together, that when each project is completed, they don't leave the company, right? And whether they're contractors or not, I think doesn't really matter. I'm not a fan of that because I think that it does more harm than good to try to save however many dollars. But I don't think that a product can be a series of projects, but I don't think it's necessarily a product then, because I don't know, I like lift and shift efforts, right? Like at HBO, when I was at HBO, right? HBO, until that company goes away, is going to need a platform for them to schedule content and a platform to package up that content. Like those are products that solve the end user's job to be done at a high level. And there's like functionality within that scheduling system product that is more granular, that you can develop over time, and it ties into an automation system that then connects to rights and royalties and legal permissions and storage platforms and editing platforms and all of that are products unto themselves. And HBO is always going to need that functionality as long as they're in the business that they're in right now. And so to me, let's just accept the fact that we need teams to support that for a really long time. Let's invest in those people. If we need to pivot now, we've got the people here still who are going to help us to figure out how to pivot. It still seems at odds with one another for me.
It feels like you're making an assumption, though, that all project teams spin up and spin down and that they're never the same team. Like I've worked with teams that were a part of a product and they stayed with it. They were a product team that delivered multiple projects that supported that product. So I think you can have a product team that is operating in a project funded model and the team is staying together. They're just, the funding is, it's no different than a team being funded a sprint at a time. If you're 2 weeks, okay, yep, that worked. I'll fund it for the next 2 weeks. That's great. I love it. I'll fund it for the next 2 weeks. The difference is it's a sprint versus a project. 3 months, 6 months, 9 months is the funding choice that they make, but they're funding it in a very similar model where they're funding it for a time box, whether it's what we call an agile time box, because Scrum has put those things in people's head and they've got those conceptions of, a week to a month, and that's an agile time box. Well, if it's outside of that, it must be waterfall and it's a project, but these are sprints. If we're being honest, right? If we're being truly honest and we look what's at the core of each of those things, there's an end goal state of value that we want to deliver, whether we deliver it in 2 weeks or we deliver it in 9 months. And the size of that value statement may grow and it's funded to deliver that. And if you deliver that, we'll fund you for the next thing. There's not a lot of difference, I don't think, in those two funding models other than what we have called it over time.
I buy into that, right? But like when you think about things like there's assumptions that get made where if we want to do 2 projects at once, we just need to hire more people, right? Or we need to pull people from other places. Or like organizational wise, like rarely do you find in a project-based organization that each person on that project team is 100% dedicated to only that project and doesn't have any other ancillary responsibilities.
Don't we get the same thing with agile teams when they have multiple different goals that they're working on, or when you have more than one product owner who's trying to steer the ship?
Well, I very much against the idea of multiple product owners for a single team.
Right, or multiple goals. I'm with you. I agree. But I think that the same things happen. And my point in that, Drew, is that it's not a framework issue. It's an organizational issue. It's an issue of too many people who are too worried about getting too much in progress, not recognizing that there's a lot of value and focus to getting things done. Like doing and done are very different. And less doing equals more done. Organizations don't want to think that, but that's the truth. That's what the data shows. And it happens in both. It happens in project-funded models. It happens in product-funded models where they start pulling teams apart and, well, I can't work on that, so I'm going to go work on this. Unless you're willing as a team to drop whatever it is you're doing to go work on that other thing, if they ask you at the in the instant, then I got news for you. You got more than one goal.
Yeah, but so you're talking about a team level. I'm talking about it like a enterprise or portfolio layer even, where when companies shift their way of funding at the enterprise and portfolio layer, then it opens up the space for self-organization to occur. It opens up the space and it gives like autonomy to the teams to be able to solution in different ways, right? So like when you talk about multiple sprint goals, well, the team is choosing those, right? Based on what they know about the product vision and what they know what's in the product backlog, because it's well organized, because a product owner has 100% authority over their own backlog. And we know that we need to uphold these values because if we start to roll back and allow stakeholders and the tyranny of the urgent force us to overwork, bad things happen.
Why do you think teams pick multiple sprint goals? Do you think they are gluttons for punishment, or do you think there's pressure coming from above?
Well, I think right now it's because it's pressure from above. And I think that pressure from above comes from the culture that, we talk about like Agile, right, is not a methodology. And it's not. And whether we want to call it a mindset or whatever, most of the world thinks that you do Agile. And so it's hard to separate the culture from the methodology in the same way that it's hard to separate the culture and the methodology from waterfall. And there is sometimes you got to burn it all down, right? And I think that the decision to transform is one of those instances where if you're like, well, we're still going to do this and we're still going to do this, but we're not going to do that, you're not committing to the rules to explore and experiment. And I don't think that waterfall has that baked in. It's let's figure this all out and then let's get going.
I think the reality is that very few companies are doing like 100% what we would consider pure Agile. And
Yep.
that's really where I think a consultant or a coach becomes worth their weight is how do we move forward? Because you can't just go from point A to point B. And really what we're telling them is go from point A to point Z when we're coming in with these different ways of working. Right? There's steps in between, and they may not always make sense in the grand scheme if you're looking back or from the outside. And there may be some waste, I'm doing air quotes, because you have to work in a certain way to unlock understanding or to get to that next level. And so there's just so many like hypotheticals, I feel like, in this argument, like with the product manager. I very rarely do I see a product manager that is fully empowered, for example. Right? Like,
Let me know if you do.
Yeah. So the challenge is how do we help people just improve? And I think that's what Agile is about. And that's what a lot of these are about, is how do we just get better at what we're doing? And it's all perception. It comes down, like Drew, you keep pointing out, like waterfall is about cutting corners and saving money. Well, we know in Agile, you save more money, at least if you're doing it the way that the three of us tend to teach it. And it's all perception. Earlier, you were talking about the illusion of control. Well, we know the human psyche would rather have an answer than not know, right? Like a person would rather wait 5 minutes for a bus and know it's 5 minutes than not know how long they have to wait and wait 3. And that's just how humans work. Perception rules us all.
Yeah. I just think that, so when I first started working, within various Agile methodologies and practices, frameworks, whatever, and I, realized that the transformation roadmap, strategy, whatever approach to thing is always from the ground up. And it makes sense. It's from the ground up because you can actually impact change there, because the people above are like, yeah. That's the thing that those people do over there. And I'll pay you to teach them how to do it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's I don't want to say easy approach, but it's an easy approach from a money-making perspective when you have a consulting firm that is coming in. But business agility really needs to happen from the top down in order for the people who, like, it just feels like sadomasochism. Like, we're not going to change the way that we're working, but we expect you to change the way that you're working in ways that we won't let you work, and we'll make it harder for you to work and do your job. Right? We need to flip everything upside down and look at it from a top-down approach. And forgive me, stop pussyfooting around this idea of, well, how am I going to package that and sell that to a CEO, right? Well, that's where it has to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Drew, what you just said strikes a chord with me, because ultimately, whether we talk about burn it all down or we talk about meeting them where they are and helping the transformation, we talk about top down. In my opinion, top down starts with a clear, shared, inspiring purpose. Mm-hmm. If you don't know what it is, why you're doing what you're doing, it doesn't matter if you burn it down, because you're going to build it up the same, right? We've gone through waterfall, then to agility, and we're on product. We've got business agility, change management, those types of things. And these are all tools that are the same tool. We're calling by a different name. And the reason we keep changing and rebranding the way we work is not because there's anything wrong with the tool. It's because we keep, as craftsmen, using the tool the wrong way. And the reason we keep using it the wrong way is because we don't understand the purpose it was intended for. If leadership can set forth, this is our purpose, this is where we're headed, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and then say to the teams, do what we need to do to get to that purpose and push down that autonomy, that's how real change comes about. We keep going from We blame the hammer and then we change it, and now it's not a hammer, now it's a nail whacker. Well, now the nail whacker doesn't work. Okay, so we're going to call it a straight retainer smacker instead, when all the time you needed a screw. Quit blaming the tool. You're an idiot for a craftsman. I mean, I'll give you a concrete example of where this makes sense. Like, we talk about meeting them where they're at. If we don't understand what it is they're trying to accomplish, it doesn't matter what practices we bring to them. So I had somebody who I was TLing for. I was his team lead. I was mentoring him. I'll use that. We'll go there. And he said, hey, the team's retrospectives suck. He says, nobody ever participates. They're terrible. I said, cool, let's talk about it. I said, do you have people who talk all the time? Yep. Cool. There's your dominant personality. I said, I'll bet you've got people who don't say anything. Yep. I'll bet people you've got in this retrospective that say things like, oh, what was that thing? And they can't remember, but they'll fill out one Post-it note just so they participated. Yep. I said, all right, about what I'd expect. I said, do you have people who come to you throughout the entire sprint and do nothing but complain when things are going bad, or they are excited when things go well? I was like, yep. I was like, okay, cool. Why are you doing the retrospective? Well, so the team can improve, so we can identify the things that aren't going well, and we can the team adjust those. We can celebrate the wins. I said, do you have to do those in a 90-minute time box every 2 weeks? We're supposed to. Why? Is that practice more important than the purpose? And he came to the realization that he was getting all the same stuff in a better quality asynchronously. So what did they start doing? They'd get together every 30 days. Hey, here's what I've heard from everybody. Does this still make sense? Is there anything in here that we want to work on? Yep, cool. 5 minutes and they were done. And they got more value out of that asynchronous retro than they were ever doing out of their traditional retro, because they got focused on purpose. Why do we do what we do? And it's only when we recognize those things that we can start to throw out the stuff that's creating waste, which is really what Lean Agile is about, right? And Lean and Agile is about, like, hey, let's get rid of the things that cost us money. You know, it doesn't make us faster. We're not getting to be better and faster because it's quicker magically. It's because we're reducing waste, right? So we get rid of the things that don't make sense, and we focus on the things that get us to our outcomes that we're trying to get to, our purpose. So the teams that I work with now, it's, if Agile's how we choose to work, great. If we're working more in a control way, great. I don't call it waterfall, I don't call it Agile. It's purpose-driven collaboration. It's getting together to achieve a common purpose. We are driven by purpose, period. And I've had more luck with that with teams, because it's, well, this is like Agile. Sure, if that works for you. We are working with agility. We are inspecting, we are adapting, we are pivoting and shifting in some ways. And in other ways, we're planning, and we've got controls in place. Great. It's a blend of both. Ultimately, it's about being driven by purpose. And I think, to me, that's where the industry has gotten away from, because the purpose has become make money. How do you sell purpose-driven collaboration and common sense to a CFO? 9 times out of 10, you can't. So what do? We call it waterfall, or we call it Agile. I'm going to sell you control, and I've got people who can help you with that, and they've got ways to do it, and they've got years of experience doing it. Nobody's going to buy your years of experience running projects and controlling things and telling people what to do, but they'll buy waterfall because it's a thing. Well, I've got common sense, and I know how to pivot and shift, and we can inspect and adapt. I've done it for years. I'm not paying you for your common sense. I got guys that do that. Well, they're not, so why aren't they? But I'll sell you Agile. I'll buy that. That's great.
But I think we're saying the same thing, right? Because what you're talking about just there is you need the CEO to pivot their thinking in that description. You know, and the other example you gave of like what would really be amazing is if the executives said, go self-organize. The other side of that coin is that you can't just go self-organize. There's going to be times where we need this executive to be the arbiter of truth and the decider when we disagree. But I think we're saying the same thing, because it really, like, you can have cold fusion occur within a small Scrum team, or a large Scrum team, or a larger size Scrum team, or a handful of Scrum teams, but it's never going to get that finely tuned bright glow where you're going to get the benefit of all the hard work that you put into changing the way that team's working, because they don't have the autonomy above them. And that's where to me, this isn't an issue really at the team level. Like, we could teach any group of like 10 or fewer people how to behave like a Scrum team. Anybody can learn it. But if the backlog isn't prepared in such a way where they can actually leverage Scrum, then it makes it infinitely more difficult for them to learn and execute along the way. And the only way for that shift to occur is for the people who are influencing the product owner's backlog to get it and understand that we have to change. And ultimately, it gets all the way to the top where we've escalated this impediment that started at the team to a degree where it can't go any higher. So why not start at the top? Because you're putting people through exhaustion and chaos. There's money burning on the table because they're in this kind of like halfway state.
There's a lot to unpack there. I guess what I would say is a couple of things. Is just because we haven't seen something doesn't mean we shouldn't expect it or hold our leaders accountable to doing it. As coaches, our job is also coaching organizational change, right? So do I think that those things are happening? Yeah. Do I think that right now the unfortunate state of the industry is that you need to have capital A Agile or waterfall to sell CFOs? That may be an unfortunate truth in most instances. Do I think that it should be that way? Hell no. And I'm going to do my best with the organizations I work with to change that, to start changing that, to coach those leaders like, hey, stop asking for this thing that isn't necessarily what exactly it is you want. And it usually starts with a question, why do you want that? And Drew, the way you framed your points right there is exactly the challenge that I see, and it's usually where the conversation starts. It's like, because what we see, and Brad, you saw this when we worked together, well, we want a Scrum team. How many times do people stop to ask that leader, why do you want Scrum team? Why do you want a Scrum team? Why do you want to do Scrum? I guarantee you, most times you ask somebody that question, they can't tell you. They can't speak to the purpose that it is they're trying to achieve. They think Scrum's going to fix their problems. Well, we need to be faster. We need this. We need that. It's like, hey, Scrum is a flashlight in a dark room. All it's going to do is show you the dust and the dirt. It isn't going to clean it up. And the problem is that we have led so long with this idea of Scrum because we wanted to sell a thing, because CFOs needed to feel like they were getting something for their X dollars, that this idea became that Agile equals Scrum. And you couldn't be further from the truth. Scrum can be Agile, but agility does not equal Scrum. And I think my concern is that we see that happen so often that people have just come in asking for this tool, and they keep asking for a hammer. I need a hammer. I need a hammer. I need a hammer. Why do you need a hammer? Well, I got these things I got to put my fence up with. Those are screws, buddy. And I think that we as coaches have a responsibility in our positions to help start bringing about change, to help coach the leaders in the organizations to think better, to think from a purpose perspective, to be better, to be smarter. I also, Drew, I don't know that I agree. I think that you can have full autonomy at a team level. I think you can push that decision making down to them completely, where you don't necessarily need an arbiter at that level. Do we see it often? No, because we've not built a culture of a workforce that feels comfortable doing it.
So my role right now, I work in a safe environment. My role is I'm coaching the transformation at the portfolio layer. And so I work with the Scrum Masters from a distance, the RTE. We have a coach that's focusing on coaching the art. We even have a single person that's coaching and supporting the Scrum Masters directly. And I take the impediments that they're experiencing and I repackage them into a relentless improvement backlog that it's their responsibility to decide whether or not that thing is important for them, enough for them to take ownership of. And what we're starting to see is that they want to take ownership of them, but it's the executives above that portfolio layer that, in order for them to then actually take ownership of that improvement backlog, they need executives to make different types of decisions that they're not making today, because they're so used to operating in a waterfall world. They don't understand the fundamental differences between a lean portfolio management as opposed to waterfall portfolio management. And there's a role that they play within this. So that's the band where I'm working right now. And that's why I say, like, I feel awful for the arts that are within the portfolio that I'm coaching, and awful for the teams that are there as well, because I know how challenging it is for them to not get the relief that they need. I mean, nobody comes to work every day and says, I want to do 35% effort today, right? Like, but we're holding them back from being able to work at 100% effort because this change, the cultural change, is not happening yet at the enterprise layer.
So Brad's jaded view of the world is I'm going to generalize here. I don't think most leaders know what to do. I think most of them are flailing. And there's many different statistics or metrics we can look at as far as training goes, that's available to leaders, what they take, how leaders are chosen. I don't think they really understand their own purpose. And I don't think they have a purpose. Their purpose is collect a paycheck. They tend to stay at companies the same length that other people do, roughly 5 years. And I think it's easier for them to look busy and to feel like they're doing something by telling people tactically what to do than it is for them to step back and try to figure out, what is this purpose? What is the reason for us to exist? And do they even care? And are they even empowered? I work with a lot of people in leadership. I would say I don't have as much experience at the C-suite. I've definitely interacted with C-suite, but all the way up to the C-suite, I've coached and I've worked with many leaders, senior executives, etc. And I constantly hear like SVPs that report directly to the C-suite express that they don't have control, that they aren't able to make decisions, or they feel like they're in the same situation as I hear the individual contributors in. And it's like, if they are feeling that way, like, who has the ability to create autonomy? Who has the ability to say, this is insane, we got to stop starting and start finishing? It's the very, very top, and it's hard. It is a hard shift. There's a perception that what I know, I just need to do better, but that's obviously not working.
It's interesting to me because, Brad, you hit on a spot for me that is near and dear to me. We see this middle layer of management that really is kind of all there. And some of them are there with the best of intentions, but they just don't have the power or authority to do anything. And you got to ask yourself why. And why is it that the power to make those decisions for so many still rests way at the top, right? Like, hey, I've got this decision I need you to make. I get this thing I need you to approve. And there's 50 million different nuances you need to understand. And the CEO looks at you, or the C-suite looks at you. But I only got time to hear 3 of them. So tell me those 3, and I'm going to make a decision with those 3. And then we can't figure out why decisions aren't made well. Then why do you continue to want to hold on to that? And Drew, you talked about this. It comes back to the illusion of control. So here's an interesting question. And this is probably a very different rabbit hole. But how does AI change that as we move forward? Do we see C-suite become more trusting of automation and AI and artificial intelligence than they do their own people, to where now they start pushing all that decision-making down to AI? Because we're seeing AI make decisions for people. It's going to continue to happen. Do we trust AI to make decisions more than we do our regular people?
So I've been thinking a lot about that, actually, because the portfolio that I've been working with is focused on data, AI, and ML. And what I've come to ponder and hypothesize around is like, there's all of this strategy to collect all of the customer data, the intelligence, financial data, and put AI and ML models on it to gain insights and whatnot. But our work management tools that really show clearly where the pipelines are broken, where flow is broken. I have yet to find a company that's like, yeah, we're going to figure out a way to integrate our, Jira Cloud data with our Azure DevOps data that the other part of the organization is using and whatnot, and start to look at how long it takes for an idea to mature, be refined and understood and developed and delivered to production. So I don't know is that what you were talking about? Because that to me is something I've been thinking a lot about.
Yeah, I agree with your point, Drew, that I don't think we're in a position to effectively leverage AI. Like, we've talked about data lakes for a while, we talked about big data for over a decade. So I agree with that. But like, if I suspend disbelief and I say, like, if AI had that data, would the C-suite trust them? Even if it doesn't, I do think the C-suite trusts AI more than they trust humans.
Too much.
Yeah, and I see those posts in that, yeah. And I would say in some regards, AI can be a good tool for helping you make decisions. It's really good at looking at a bunch of data. We are not so good at holding a bunch of data in our brains. So that is something that it can do for us. But the data still has to be rationalized to figure out what we're going to do with it. And AI is only going to tell you what has been done before. It's not true intelligence. In fact, I kind of hate that it's called AI, to be honest, because it's not intelligence like a human being. It doesn't have that ability to come up with something that's never been done before, at least not yet. And I do think that there's a time where leaders do need to rely a little bit on intuition. There isn't, we do this every single time and we're successful, because each company is unique.
Yeah, I mean, I think it provides correlation and causation to a degree of accuracy.
Yeah, I also think it creates the danger of maximizing too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that most C-suite, they don't understand AI. They think they understand what it is. They know they want it.
My more recent talking points has been on how it's just insane to me that companies are writing blank checks for AI. And we will do everything within our power at a company to buy a solution, improve the
Yeah.
process, improve the tooling, find some new life hack, then we will to just learn how humans work best. Right? Like, that's not business or whatever the mental holdback is. Like, they just refuse to be like, oh, maybe we should learn how humans work best and we would get the most out of them. Nope, buy a tool, buy a process.
Well, and the irony behind it all is ultimately when C-suite and leadership doesn't trust their people, what they're saying is they don't trust themselves. Because who hired those people to start with? If you don't trust them, don't hire them. And if you hire them, then trust them to make the right decisions, set a vision, and get out of the way. I think leadership, they struggle to set a clear vision, and subconsciously they realize that there is confusion and chaos that happens below them that is because of a lack of a clear vision and shared purpose. So they don't trust the organization to align around that. So what do? They supplement that with control rather than fixing what they should, which is a clear shared vision and purpose. If you can get a leader to establish a clear shared vision and purpose, and you have people who are passionate about that and aligned to it, you can trust them to work according to that purpose. But if you don't trust them to work according to your purpose, you got to ask yourself, is your purpose not clear? Are they not aligned? Have you not done a good job of articulating it? Is that why you don't trust them? And again, back to your earlier point, Drew, it all comes back to leadership fixing the things that they need to fix. But again, back to the other points that we've made, they keep fixing the wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can't figure out why the problems don't go away. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
Yeah. To me, control is fast food. Like, it's the easy thing in the moment, but it's harder for you in the long run. And it makes me think of this image, this quote that I saw on social media earlier today that really got me thinking, and maybe you guys have already seen it, but it goes, marriage is hard, divorce is hard, choose your hard. Obesity is hard, being fit is hard, choose your hard. Being in debt is hard, being financially disciplined is hard, choose your hard. Starting a business is hard, working a 9-to-5 job is hard, choose your hard. Life will never be easy, but you can choose your hard, choose wisely. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about here is like Agile is hard. It's hard to shift. It's hard to provide autonomy, but so is trying to force control. It's just hard in different ways.
Yeah, I like that. The idea is stop blaming your choice for it being hard. It's going to be hard. I mean, this is the movement we've seen where Agile is dead. Agile's not dead. It's just you've used it wrong or it's hard to do. Sorry, nobody said it was going to be easy. And anybody that did was lying to you to get your CFO to sign a check.
But that takes us around back to the original topic, right? What you said right there is like Agile being dead. And you're right. I don't think Agile is dead. I think there's a perception that Agile is dead because the market is flooded with people who really don't understand what the manifesto was about. And so to the PMI's purchase of agility, like they're doing what you're saying. They bought a tool, right? And they don't understand it. And the people who are disciples, right, or practitioners of the PMI ways of working are getting a false sense of understanding of what agility actually is. And that's why I feel like, well, one, I'm reacting to that, right? I'm reacting to that to say that projects can never be agile. They absolutely can. But right now, I feel like it's way too dangerous to promote that way of thinking because I think that once you open up the doorway for Agile-ish within waterfall and that's what we have right now. We already have that. We have thousands of companies that are in some form of like Scrumfall, stuck in just that limbo place because nobody can move the culture needle back in the direction of waterfall and nobody can move it forward in the direction of Scrum and agility. So
Yeah. Companies have been catfished and the honeymoon's over and they want a divorce now because they didn't get the Agile that they bought. But the thing is, that Agile exists. So do you divorce and walk away and give up, or do you keep trying to attain that?
I guess I've got two things I'll say here. Is the moment that Agile becomes something that everybody is doing and looks the same is the moment it's not Agile anymore. Because it should be contextual. So I spent 8 years at Chase, and I used to say that Chase had its own flavor of Agile. And I said it in a negative way. And as I've grown and kind of learned and started to evolve in this, that's the right thing. You should have your own flavor of agility. Now, there are certain core elements and values and principles that you should have, right? Values are what we believe. Principles and behaviors are how those beliefs manifest. Now, those behaviors are going to manifest a little bit differently, but you should be able to look at a behavior and get an idea for what the core belief or value is that drives that behavior. The behaviors are going to look a little different, but the core value should be discernible, or you should be able to go, oh, yeah, I see how that value is laced in that behavior. I see how those two are tied together. It should always be Agile-ish, in my opinion. The other thing I guess I would say is, do I trust that the motivations behind this merger were in the best interest of agility? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But does that mean that we can't leverage the fact that now there's an industry behemoth and people are going to come to them because they have credibility just through reputation? Absolutely. And will I be a Trojan horse? You better believe it. So if I can come in there and I come in under your PMI version of Agile-ish, great. But you know what? I'm a Trojan horse, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to teach you what it truly means, because I won't be dissuaded away from what it truly is and it's all about. So if this opens the door, great. I can't tell you how many times that things that I believe or things that I stand for have been hijacked for others' purposes throughout my life. I'm just going to flip the script this time. I'm going to hijack what it is that they've done, and I'm going to do it for a way that's healthy and take advantage of this. So is it great? Their motivations, probably not. But I'm going to look at the opportunity that's in front of us instead of being focused on their motivations, because I can't control their motivations. What I can do is I can take advantage of the fact that they've done this now, and I can make it work for me.
Are you recruiting more Greeks then to fill your Trojan horse? Is that the call to arms?
Come on, baby. There's plenty of room in the horse. Climb on in.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think this has been a great conversation. To summarize, in my opinion, I don't think we have a great answer to how we get there, but I think we have all kind of seen the same challenges in the industry right now. Do you have any final thoughts, Todd? And do you have any talks coming up? How do people reach out to you? And so on.
So I'll disagree. I do think we have a great answer, but I'll save it for the last remark.
All
I'll
right.
save that as your closing thought. I am currently storyboarding a book called The Alligator Closest to the Boat that will be, it'll be interesting, I think, and it will be a quick, easy read, and I'm hoping that it will appeal to the inner child in all of us who are excited about value delivery and purpose-driven collaboration for our companies, for our teams, for ourselves, for our industry. No talks coming up right now. Like I said, I submitted to PMI Global Summit. We'll see what happens there. I may be showing up at Cincy Deliver. Who knows? I'm always opinionated and happy to share my opinion. But I guess the other thing I would say is feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I think you can probably put the link out there somewhere in the chat, Brad, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is, and here it comes. You ready? It's profound.
Let's hear
It
it.
depends.
It depends.
It's always contextual, right? I mean, that's the thing. And we have to stop trying to solve this problem like it's the same problem for everybody. How do we deal with this? It depends. What are you trying to deal with? What's your context? What's your situation look like? It depends. Thanks for inviting me back, gentlemen. I appreciate it. This was a blast. It's always good to see you both.
Yep, absolutely.
I'll talk to you gentlemen later. I'm going to go put my daughter down for bed.
All right, later, Todd.
Focus on the important stuff. Bye, all.